Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our talk today on building trust, how engineering and security can speak the same language.
We've got an agenda for what's on our docket. We're going to spend 5 minutes going over why this is important, go into some example personas as well. We've got 3 case studies where we'll use some real-world examples of best practices and some areas to avoid. And then we're going to bring it all together so you can walk away ideally from this session with an understanding of the benefits, but also the practical choices you can make to create better alignment with security and engineering.
I'm Jess. I'm currently part of the security team at OpenAI. In prior lives, I've been part of security teams at Vanta, Robinhood, and Dropbox as the companies have scaled. It's my second time at SAINTCON, and even more excited to be here with Kim. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I moonlight as a musician.
Hi, I'm Kim. I'm a senior compliance specialist at Vanta. I work on internal compliance, security, and privacy. For the most part, I've done that for the last 8 years, generally at Boston-based companies. I do live at Cambridge, Mass. And when I'm not exclusively thinking about security and compliance, I foster dogs. So feel free to talk to me about dog things also. This is a topic that Jess and I feel really passionate about. We think there's takeaways for everyone truly to have a positive impact in your role and in your department and your company. But also from our perspective, we've seen running security and compliance projects, processes, and programs in collaboration with engineering is inevitable. And when it goes well, typically that has a very tangible, good output, an application, a feature, a business change. But when it goes poorly, it's more subtle to trace those elements back. Hopefully and often, there's still that output. But we've seen a disconnect that can lead to a feature that went out, but maybe not in the way it should have. And then you pay the price, if not in the bugs, but when someone comes in to assess it. We felt the pain when our jobs get incredibly complicated when we're mediating instead of building. And we've seen how businesses adapt efficiently and effectively, or they can't pivot and change. And breakdowns happen when communication, priorities, and strain are increased. For us, the potential of everyone's, favorite word, breaches, and our response being held in the mix of engineering and security getting along seems also to make this especially important to us. And we wish it was as simple as everyone just needs to get along and be friends and work together. That wouldn't make the greatest presentation in the world. But also, it is pretty nuanced, it's complicated, and we want to break it down, especially for why it's important for everyone here today.
So why does this matter? First, by partnering with engineering teams, we can guide engineers to build security into their workflows, adopt a threat modeling mindset up front with defined processes and best practices, instead of trying to play catch up or rework features later on. Second is collaboration. Engineers are really focused on building features and improving performance, and our role is to ensure that we do this in a risk-centric way together. And as another benefit, having a strong partnership with engineering also helps us build muscle for partnering together during incidents. Finally, aligning security and engineering builds a stronger culture of security overall. For example, engineers become much more aware of security risks and how to partner with us in the right ways, while security teams gain a better understanding of areas of friction and how to best support engineering toward their current objectives. This also helps ensure that engineering teams have the necessary guardrails in place when they're making decisions that could potentially have a security impact. So to take this a little bit further, let's dive into some examples of security and engineering personas at a hypothetical company. There's a big caveat here. We realize that these are only a small handful of example personalities and traits, and that folks bring many, many other skills and strengths to the table. So on the one hand, security teams, as we know, can tend to be a little more risk-averse, a little more detail and policy-oriented than your average human. It's our role to focus on detecting and preventing threats, defining and enforcing best practices, and we love a good set of structured policies and guidelines. On the other, engineering teams are often more willing to take risks with a focus on efficiency, optimizing performance, scalability, and improving user experience. They may also take a slightly more iterative and experimental approach to development. And in the middle, this is where we overlap and where we can really tap into speaking that same language with an analytical, collaborative, and systems thinking approach to solving problems that we all care about.
Now that we walked through why we care about this, why we think it's objectively important, and talking through some of the personas that may find us more similar than we think, but also have our unique differences. We want to take this further. We've got some real world case studies. Details have been changed for anonymity, but to highlight some of the critical aspects of effective partnership and where decisions can also go wrong. All right, so our first case study embodied it in a security, compliance, and engineering conundrum. Your company is getting pressure to achieve a SOC 2, probably customer driven to some degree. It's good, but there's some inconsistencies about how prepared you may be to do this. You did a preliminary internal assessment, but it was very broad and handled very quickly. You're aware that the controls that are tied to the software development life cycle did not probably get the thorough review or tests that they should have had. Now, your team suspects that the software development lifecycle may not match the expectations of what the compliance requirements are to get that check mark in your audit. What do you do? Take a minute, think through it, think maybe in your circumstances what you would handle. And on the next slide, we'll get into some of the do's and don'ts. A danger here, a big one, is to expect everyone to be on the same page. If you throw around terms like secure, compliance, security, it gets very hard for people to know that you're interpreting that in the same way. As security professionals, one of our jobs is to interpret complexity with security principles, to take guardrails and standards and disseminate that information. Lots of ways to do that, but there's two big buckets of ways to break it down. One is to give examples, comparisons. We'll get into that more in another case study. And then for this one, a specific way to do that is to get really specific and literal. So in this case, at specifically what security checks are existing in place and what they're doing. Is this secure? Has a lot of potential for misinterpretations. An ideal state is to understand what's going on and to break it down so that when you ask a question, understanding how something is secure or not secure, the answer is yes, no, or sometimes. Literally what's actually being done. Another danger is acting like the past and the future are not different. In a situation like this, where you may suspect but you don't know, you need to get confident on the state of the state. And a big piece of that is understanding all the aspects of what's going on. So again, very central in asking questions, but especially one that give you confidence in the process, as well as appetite for that change. We've got some examples over here, but they're questions like, have we done instances like this? How do we handle this now? And what does work like this look like to implement? And then finally, don't put the burden on engineering exclusively. It's less effective, it's less collaborative, and it's less likely to be done the way you're looking for. So breaking that down and going into sort of the aspects of what take these pitfalls and best practices to the next step. The big theme for this, understanding your technical stakeholders. Think about who's involved, how they're involved, and you can do that in a couple of big ways. Never presume someone knows something. Never ask or always ask questions to gauge understanding. And there's a little bit of a stepping into the world, a shared perspective as well. Understanding the knowledge and the shared goals that you may or may not have with the other group. Jumping into our second case study. Your company is also quickly trying to do something. They're taking an action. This time it's not a compliance certification, but it's a feature in your product. The problem is that partly because of this expediency, security concerns were not addressed in this customer-facing feature. So there's friction. Leads to a challenge of engineering feeling like the security requirements are late, they're complex, and now they're causing problems. You'll ultimately have not gotten on board to implement anything the security team is suggesting. And now security is the bottleneck. When we're breaking this down and thinking about it, one of the big themes for this is don't expect requirements to look the same. As we talked about with the previous case study, you can interpret this with having examples. It helps with the justification of why this is a priority and also has a collaborative approach. You're allowing people to build something together based on an example you may have. And if you don't have an example, if it hasn't come up at your previous company, it's a good excuse to go to your network. That's a good excuse to find examples so that you can bring that to the table and not just build something unknown for everyone. Second big part of this to focus on is thinking about what the business should do. In the scope of this case study, I think it would be very easy to highlight every single reason that a feature could be insecure, vulnerable, and cause availability concerns. But there's an important element to advising the business, especially technical stakeholders, and it's identifying what are your biggest risks and how do you prioritize them. Sometimes the business may be willing to accept those risks, but outlining what risks they present, how we will react to them, and what problems they could cause are pretty significant pillars of that. And risk, for what it's worth, looks different for every business. Your risk appetite may be derived from your industry, frameworks you comply with, your maturity, your customer commitments, data you're processing. Being able to document that, communicate that is a critical piece of this. Always we want to do the best we can, but sometimes we have to pick. And then with the third item, this one's I think pretty intuitive. If you tell engineering, we have to do all of this before deploying, you can't just leave it that way. Confirm the results, walk through the changes, and highlight how to implement security checks timely in the future is a continual process. Bringing this back again to what's our theme with this case study, very much embodied in doing the work. Need to be able to explain why we're doing something, answer questions, ask questions. And that can be really tricky sometimes. You need to think about a solution-based approach. What's truly solving for the business, not just one person, one team, one department, but actually what's needed. And then there's an aspect to this that's very much being open-minded. Willingness, understanding, seeing things from another perspective, and again, potentially compromising on that so that you're interpreting security requirements in a way that's effective.
So moving on to our last case study, imagine this scenario. Your company is dealing with frequent, high-profile incidents, but there's no formal incident response program beyond, a couple bullets or the right tools or people in place to handle them. And the problem is that incidents are handled in this ad hoc and manual way. There may be some benefits of relying on individual experience and expertise, right? But the fact that the program isn't defined leads to inconsistencies, confusion, and inefficiency with the response process. It's noisy, it's stressful, and it really wears on you if you're an incident responder. The challenges you're facing are that there's no clear ownership. It's not obvious who's in charge of the problem, who will make the first move, what resources they will tap into. In addition, anyone who jumps into solving this will be building from scratch, right? They'll be building the plan, the tooling, the program while these incidents keep happening. Imagine you're wearing a security or compliance hat, and you know that engineering is just as concerned about the problem. So think about the situation and what you might do, especially if you're part of smaller teams or companies that have dealt with something similar before. Bringing up this example persona slide again. Look at all the overlapping traits here in blue that could be really helpful actually as we work together to tackle this. So for security folks, our detail-oriented nature, ensuring we're following our own rules and policies helps us build an IR program that's practical, that meets our requirements, both from a tactical and a compliance perspective. And we can tap into engineering teams' focus on efficiency and iteration to build an IR program with the right tooling and the right automation and personnel and eliminate anything that's manual or tedious. And in addition, we can tap into our overlapping strengths to solve the problem together. So a couple do's and don'ts, pitfalls, don't panic. Don't wait for someone else to start solving the problem. That just makes everything worse. So instead, partner with leadership and get alignment on what their roles are. Using a framework like responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed helps at least you figure out who cares about this problem and what is your role. Start with folks who are interested, understand the pain and invested in the problem, and go from there. Next, identify additional champions and partners. These could be engineers, folks who frequently wind up leading or managing incidents, kind of akin to like an incident commander or manager role. It could be people who frequently report incidents or end up being pulled in based on their roles or the fact that they're great partners or calm under pressure, or they are the right decision makers in some of those cases. While not everyone you talk to may end up playing a major role in the project, you will at least have folks who you can trust and will provide you with really good, honest feedback. For anyone involved, make sure you have clear asks of them and support any of these where possible with like mock-ups or examples and data to illustrate what that urgency is, what your motivation is, or anything helpful contextually for them to solve the problem together. Define your urgency and your priority and your timeline. So for example, like prioritize the components of the program and any tooling you'd like with a system that makes sense to your business as well as your team. I've seen people use P0 for critical, P1 for must have. That way people can kind of understand the problem and how you'd like to tackle it. Define your working cadence and format. Consider having a backlog of all the things you'd like to build. Figure out how to communicate, hey, we're working on this on a weekly cadence. What are some decisions that could be made async and by whom? And what are some things that should be tactically discussed? And then lastly, identify the right forums and audiences to provide that insight and transparency. It could be an email, regular Slack posts, updates on a page. Either way, be sure to keep your stakeholders and leadership in the loop on what your decisions are, any trade-offs, and anything that also might impact folks with ongoing incidents. To wrap up this case study, this one is all about getting leadership buy-in and communicating outward in order to drive toward outcomes. Targeting the right leaders and decision makers who have a stake in the game, defining what you need from them and the specific role they play, being transparent about priority, highlighting those key trade-offs and decisions you've considered or that you'd like leadership to weigh in on in some cases too, and then being sure to keep leadership and key stakeholders updated on changes you go.
All right, so pulling together our case studies, their takeaways, we want to go back to our main goal for this presentation. What are the benefits and how do we know when engineering and security speak the same language? So pulling that back, we want to say you walk away from here today, you at least can do some tactical things. These are our 3 big buckets. What literally you can do. The first is understanding your stakeholders. And again, it's not as simple as saying, okay, these groups need to be involved with this project. It's understanding who has the background, who has the knowledge, who's driving the initiative, and who needs to be involved to make this effective and thoughtful. Doing the work. Not, it's maybe the most straightforward of all 3 of these, but getting started can be complicated. Doing the work is very much predicated on that. So when we're taking action, we need to take that step back sometimes. Understand what is actually the work that needs to be done. Does it have to be done? And getting aligned with that definition. Being realistic about what that entails for security, for engineering, and other cross-functional partners. And again, that bigger picture in the business as well. And then finally, getting the right buy-in from the right people. That's probably just even a cross-functional project best practice, but especially when we're talking about the security of a company or its application or its internal security, we can't take that lightly. We also can't presume that people will also think it's important or unimportant. We need to make sure that everyone can care and act in the same way as we would hope and model them to be. And the security team starts with that. Leadership buy-in gets the priorities, the objects of your goals, and criticality more easily defined and built in, especially for changes in the business.
We also talked about the tendencies and shared strengths of some example personas. Key thing to remember is to leverage each other's strengths and our shared traits to figure out how to tap into that collaboration.
All right, so some benefits, some takeaways. We talked about things to do and how it can go wrong and right. We also want to talk about true benefits when we've seen this go really well and effective. And this is, I think, for the security, the compliance team, the security leader, the security professional. These are overall some themes. Security by design. When engineers and security build together, as we all know, security measures are implemented from the start. They're not reactionary. It reduces vulnerabilities, it minimizes risks, and it also strengthens the ability to be resilient in protecting data and assuring your customers of your product. Both collaborative threat modeling and automation and testing are very tied together. It doubles down on the ability of security to be in the mix when it comes to development. It's more practical, it's more efficient, and especially when it's anticipated, does not slow down development, while also making sure it's more secure. When we talk about metrics and KPIs, it's an opportunity for us to have common goals so both teams can progress and track together. That's essentially a step in aligning security improvements with business objectives. And for what it's worth, it's a lot easier to get on the same page when you're tied to the same quantitatively proven goals and meeting up against them. Training. When you're building together and planning together, it also means you're setting up your teams to be more naturally cross-functional. Knowledge is power. We're never going to say it's bad to know things. But even more specifically, engineers do their job better when they understand the security requirements. They're not just doing them because someone says. And the flip is true. Security professionals do their job better when they understand how the software development lifecycle works and operates at their organization, both the pitfalls and the good things, as well as the overall structure of the company and how that fits into it. And then finally, by partnering with engineering, the security team, where it may be a blocker or seen as a blocker, can shift so it's an enabler and driving that business success.
Zooming out to the big picture, something to remember is no matter what your role is, collaborating well between security and engineering helps tie back to the goals of your business. Some key things: reducing security debt, right? Providing these requirements up front, we can build secure features more efficiently, avoiding fire drills or expensive fixes. This also helps with time to market. Trust and satisfaction. Externally, customers need to trust you to use your product, right? Especially in a market and an environment like ours. In addition, there's a regulatory compliance angle to keep in mind too. And though compliance requirements can be quite a bit to comply with, there's also a lot of value add. This also offers the ability to scale with new markets that have different needs and requirements. And that goes twofold internally. When partnerships are effective, processes are clear, and stakeholders are aware and confident of their responsibilities, and they know how to partner with you, people feel the trust and satisfaction they need to do their jobs well. There's also a focus on innovation. Building a secure foundation or defined path upfront allows engineering teams to do what they do and innovate as they need, with security as a guide along the way. And stronger risk management. As a security team, risk is always a collaborative conversation with engineering. Making sure it's proactive means that we can manage risk in a more robust way that aligns with the business and allows us to make more informed decisions upfront versus in end-hour moments. And then lastly, security is a competitive advantage. No one wants to buy a product that's not secure or reliable. And as all of you know, CISOs are not the only ones asking about security these days. Teams across the board are looking for verification that they can attest to a product's security posture and program before they implement a solution. A company's security team and posture can really be a differentiator. And acknowledging that security isn't just to keep us safe, but to ensure that we are doing the right things and that we are marketable to the knowledgeable customer base that you already have helps ensure that security is a group activity and a shared goal across your whole organization. And to close, while security teams know this already, knowing that your company's security posture is a competitive advantage also highlights the true value of having a strong security and compliance program and team.
I think we've got time for questions, if anybody has any.
Oh. Yes.
Sarah.
Avoid reassessing, is that what you said? I think one of the pitfalls of avoiding reassessing is thinking about it that it's one and done. You say, oh, you do it. I trust that you do it. That's great. Continual improvement, continuous monitoring is very much like a key cornerstone of that. I think that's how you scale and mature, but that's also very much like emboldened in saying no process is effective. If you could do it one time, it's the replication of it. Yeah.
Good.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yeah.
If you were that having leadership buy-in or and understanding your stakeholder, is there a particular that all of it and like I can see understanding the stakeholders and a leadership buy-in that they may be a precursor. But wait, what
That's a great question. It probably is a little scenario specific is maybe the answer, which is, sorry, a little like hand wavy, not answering your question. But I would imagine doing the work, right, really helps you understand like who the stakeholders are, right, and understanding the problem. So that might be one of the first steps. Kim, I don't know if you have thoughts, but I would imagine leadership buy-in is probably like a little later toward that, because if you're not doing the work and understanding like the rest of your stakeholders, it's hard to figure out who, your leadership, who's going to care about the problem.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I think that's a great call out. I think it is a way that you kind of almost have to interpret it depending on the situation too. Like I wouldn't say doing the work is the middle step if the work is already happening and security gets involved at that stage. Like that truly might be taking it back and kind of reevaluating. So it depends.
One thing about leadership buy-in too is like being able to anticipate their questions, because you are going to get questions. And so that, really understanding like what you are dealing with and anticipating and even figuring out how you anticipate those and how you communicate updates out, that's super critical. Like you do not want to be caught off guard or like scrambling last minute to pivot if, they raise a concern you haven't anticipated.
Totally.
Anything else? Okay, this is where to find us. And thanks so much for joining us. Feel free to reach out or hang back if you have questions, and have a great rest of SAINTCON.
Thank you.